everybody. Welcome back to another version of Digital Divas, the interview. This time I have the amazing Elizma Nolte in studio at Innovation City with me. Elizma, welcome.
Thank you, Sandra. Thanks for having me. And please don't call me amazing because we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome today.
Noted, but you actually are, because you, I believe, basically helped Google and Meta start up in Africa.
Yeah, I mean, again, excuse my inner imposter here, it sounds a lot bigger than it is. Of course, I was part of a very big machine in both instances. But yeah, my journey led me to Google South Africa, where we grew the local team here. And it's from 0 to, I think, up to 60 people now. And then I spent 7.5 years at Meta, which was a lot of fun with Facebook and Instagram and promoting that on the continent, and also opening Lagos.
Okay, well, I have to ask, did you ever meet the Zuck?
That is the question I get the most. That, and can you help me retrieve my password? So I've sat very close to Mark Zuck. Like, he used to do a Q&A at HQ every Friday.
Oh, wow.
So you can go and ask him whatever you want, and people would just be lining up the mics. I would be petrified. I would absolutely be petrified. I don't know what I would say to him. I'd probably freeze. He is incredibly intelligent and very intimidating, but yeah, also very sharp and funny.
Do you remember any interesting questions that people ask Mark Zuckerberg?
You know what? People ask him everything from tell us what really happened at Harvard and the story behind the social network.
Oh, right.
To when can we have a crash on campus?
Okay.
So the company has ridiculous benefits, and so there are also like just a lot of very, people just going, well, we don't like the brown M&Ms,
So I mean, obviously when Meta first started, wanting to expand into Africa, realizing the advantage of that, obviously it must have been hoorah and very exciting. But you see, it feels like they've kind of sort of taken a step back a little bit. Can you explain that maybe for us?
I think the opportunity that both Google and Meta see in Africa is they absolutely see it as a huge opportunity. Now, the problem is the timing. So I think Google came into Africa a bit early. And I mean, they had offices in Nigeria and Kenya and Ghana, and some of them have since closed down because they were experimenting. And they were doing a lot of interesting things around energy and Wi-Fi and payments, and so they literally were trying to solve problems, and some of those projects got shut down because that's the nature of these companies. They try things. If they don't work, they're very quick to kill them as well.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's the one reason. I think the other reason is that we don't understand is that revenue growth. I mean, these companies have to follow revenue growth. So they want to be ahead of the curve. They want to come in early, but not too early. Mm-hmm. But it's difficult for them to expand if the revenue growth is not expanding.
Okay, well that makes sense.
So and people need to understand digital for revenue growth to expand, and digital marketing, and that was a key part of my job is teaching people that.
Fantastic. And why did you end up leaving these two dynamic and gigantic global companies?
Yeah, so Google, I actually the opportunity to work for Facebook came along, and that was a very interesting jump. I mean, I was so passionate about the Google brand, and I didn't quite feel the same way about Facebook then, which is, since changed. It's an amazing company, but I really relished the opportunity of just helping start from scratch. I'm a bit of a builder, so literally starting with person number one on the ground in Johannesburg, and then building the journey further in Lagos. And so I was getting a little bit itchy. And then lockdown happened, and I started working remotely, and that was amazing, and it got comfortable.
Yeah.
And then something happened that ripped me out of my comfort zone, and Meta decided to make 20,000 people across the globe redundant
wow.
as they were downsizing and focusing on revenue, as I said. And unfortunately, the Africa office was a big part of that, as they were looking at restructuring and taking management away and small teams away. yeah, so that was a blessing.
Do you think that was a
led me to
good
where I'm
thing?
now.
Do you think it was a good thing that they did?
I think it was a good thing for the company, for two reasons. I mean, obviously, the reason they do this is to bump the share price, which has gone up, and show that they're focusing, because they were getting a lot of criticism that they are spending too much thinking about the metaverse and investing in things that isn't making money yet. So I think they had to send that signal to investors. Obviously, employers are your most expensive. So cutting, 20,000 people means that you are cutting a lot of costs. So that makes you more efficient. And I think thirdly, these companies have grown so fast, so incredibly fast. I mean, I think Facebook went from like 5,000 to 50,000 at the time, 500, whatever it is now. When I was there, and when you're hiring that fast, it's great. But I also think sometimes you have to clean out, because it's such a great company to work. Not everyone wants to leave. The people who do leave are generally the ones who leave for better opportunities or to start their own thing. But some people get stuck. So I also think it's a bit of just a clean out, sort of, because not everyone can get to the top. So they want that young, hungry people coming in.
Okay, well, that's great. I mean, so you've obviously had an African sort of business experience there. What are some of the unique challenges and opportunities you see in the Africa tech and media landscape?
I think interestingly, the challenges haven't changed much since I first started talking about this, 14 years ago. So around 2010, when I was at Google, we used to say, okay, it is connectivity, content, and knowledge. Now, there still are challenges. I think connectivity has come a very long way.
Yeah.
I mean, from 2010, unbelievably, like in terms of devices, prices, data coming down, and just the number of people online. And then content, we're also starting to do really well. I mean, there was a time at Google where we literally ran projects to get local content online, because if you Googled stuff, there wouldn't be any local results.
Right. Yeah.
Now we are exporting, our YouTube stars, and we've got some amazing African content. But we do need to stay ahead of the curve there in terms of what's coming with Web 3.0. Do we have people who can create content in virtual reality, for instance? But that brings me to knowledge. And I mean, that's the biggest thing. Our biggest challenge is skills. And are we going to have enough skills to make the most of Web 3.0 and all the benefits that blockchain and VR and XR and AI is going to offer us?
Yeah.
To not be left behind. I mean, we don't have a shortage of challenges to solve on the continent.
Yeah.
Big, beautiful challenges.
Yeah.
So we should be driving like innovation in education and agriculture and finance.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a slow push, but there is a push forward towards that kind of stuff. So I think that's a great thing. Advertising revenue in Africa, with not everybody being connected, are Google and Meta doing really well on this continent? What do you, in your personal opinion?
Yeah, so it depends on how you define well. If you asking, are they completely eating all the local broadcasters and publishers' bread? Yes.
Yeah.
Are they helping kill newspapers and websites? But that's part of a changing world. It's not willfully done.
Yeah.
Are we a big slice of the global revenue? Not yet.
Really?
South Africa is other than if we leave Egypt out, because I looked after sub-Saharan Africa, Egypt does pretty well, but South Africa, Nigeria. Do relatively well, but the rest of the continent, Kenya is okay. The rest of the continent is very, very, very small.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's go completely left field, all right? Because of all your knowledge and everything, but you've decided to do a masterclass at the Digital Divas Summit called Grow Your Confidence, Addressing Your Inner Imposter. What imposter syndrome, what is it, first of all, and why is it particularly relevant for women?
Yeah, so imposter syndrome. So this has been a much bandied around word. I think every celebrity these days apparently has imposter syndrome.
Or they're narcissists.
Yeah, it's one of the other 30% are probably narcissists. Yeah. But, up to 70% of people apparently do claim to suffer from this thing called imposter syndrome, which for me is very interesting because I'm like, if 70% of people have this syndrome, then it's not really a syndrome. It's just it's part of human nature.
Right.
So I first discovered this phenomena when I was at business school, and I was at INSEAD, which is one of the top business schools in the world. And I had this amazing socioeconomics professor who said, "Okay, close your eyes, raise your hand if you think everyone else is supposed to be here, but they made a mistake with you, you know." And I was just like, oh my word, this is like, my GMAT was like not as high as everyone else's, and they only let me in because I'm from Africa and I played the diversity card and I wrote a good essay. I'm definitely like not the person who's just got lucky. But without fail, the interesting thing is when they ask those questions at Ivy League schools across the world, 70% of people raise their hands.
Wow.
So hence imposter syndrome. Back then I called it the fear of being found out, because that is a good way to explain it. It's literally a fear that at any moment someone's going to discover that you're not supposed to be here,
Right.
that you're a fraud,
Yeah.
and you're going to get fired, or you're going to,
Do you think that's got a lot to do with the fact that, particularly in a new job, for instance, or a new position, you don't really know what you're doing just yet because it's new. So because you don't know what you're doing, it's coming across as like you feel like, well, should I know exactly what I'm doing when I walk in here? Should I have the confidence?
Yeah.
I'm sure it's quite a tricky situation. How long does it take for somebody to get rid of this feeling?
Yeah. So I mean, I think there is that which is natural. You're going to start a new job, you're not going to know everything, right? And that's normal. And most people will realize that that's normal, and they'll kind of wing it for a bit until they realize that they have to
fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it, which men, by the way, are better at than we are. And yeah. And
do you think it's a testosterone thing?
I don't know I will have to look at the reasons behind that psychologically.
Either that or they're snorting cocaine in the bathrooms.
Yeah. Maybe. But the imposter, the person with really acute imposter syndrome it won't go away for them. That's the problem. Like, because they will set the bar so ridiculously high that they can never meet it. And if they get good feedback, they won't internalize it. So you can tell me a million times what a great job I'm doing, I'm still going to think like, well, if you actually just really knew, then you wouldn't say that. Or, phew, I got away with it this time. Like, but that fear of that any day, any moment, someone is going to just fire you does not necessarily go away unless you work at this thing. Because you're telling yourself a story that you need to start retelling yourself.
So you're like suffering from anxiety, basically.
Very strongly linked to anxiety, very strongly linked to depression.
Is it a very internal thing, only an internal thing, or can it also be because of other factors?
It's a good question, because one of the things I talk about as well is first of all starting by identifying the roots. So those roots could be internal, like, for instance, childhood trauma is often part of that. Or it could be external, such as, well, I live in a society ruled by men, right? So that's why it affects women and minority groups, and not just women, but the research shows that it affects minority groups more, because it's also about feeling like you belong, right? And if say at university, when I was one of 2 computer science students and that were female, you kind of very easy to go, I'm not a real programmer,
Right.
I'm just studying computer science, but I'm not really a programmer.
What are girls doing in here? Yeah.
So and we obviously in this country have a lot of issues where women might feel I got this job because I'm black, and so that might not be the case. But if they're struggling from imposter syndrome, they're gonna use that as an excuse. So, well, I only got this job because I'm a token X.
So what do you say to women or people who are actually suffering from this. Can you share some? Obviously, you have to give everything away because you got to go to Digital Divas to hear the whole the workshop that you're going to put on. But what is some practical advice that people can, actionable advice that people listening can identify and address?
Yeah, I think, like I said, it really does start with identifying the root, because there's usually a point in your life where you started telling yourself the story. And it's you have to figure out where that came from, and then you have to figure out how to retell your story. So we will share some tips on how you can do that, and then there's some techniques that you can actually use to identify, speak to, and quiet this imposter, and that's where it gets interesting, because it's a lot to do with your limbic system. Because it's driven from fear, right? So it's why I called it the fear of being found out. But
so it's not only mental, but it's physical as well.
It's physically, your body is going into a state of fight and flight, and which makes you either try and work super hard so you don't fail, or makes you hide so that you're not discovered.
Right.
Because it's like, it's dangerous to be in the spotlight. So so it's also just techniques to help deal with that and slowly rewire the brain and the story you tell yourself.
That's amazing, Elizma. The ladies who are going to be joining us at Digital Divas, they're basically all kinds of ages, age groups and stuff. But what key takeaways would you like them to walk away with after your masterclass at the summit?
I hope they will be inspired, and if there are people really identify with this story and my story, which I'll share, realize that they're not alone, and realize the importance for us to continue, especially as women, to continue connecting around and talking about these, whether it's this issue or other issues we face in the workplace. Because really, a big sort of antidote to all of this is connection, and vulnerability, and putting these things out in the open, and dropping comparison. So because
we do that a lot as women, don't we?
A lot, yeah.
And I mean, it doesn't help. Digital media doesn't help either.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all.
What do you think about the difference in generations? Do you think the Gen Zs have it a little bit more waxed than, say, millennials or Gen Xers like me or baby boomers?
In terms of?
In terms of this confidence thing.
The confidence. I need to go and do some research about that, because it's an interesting question. I think on the surface, we perceive them to be a lot more confident.
Yeah.
They have a lot more of a voice, and they're a lot more empowered to start businesses and tackle world issues.
Change their gender.
Exactly. So, but I think it would be interesting to know what's going on the inside, especially, like you said, in a world where we live with this constant comparison and which feeds this feeling of not being good enough. So,
one thing I know is that they do value psychoanalysis a lot. So I think maybe they probably have it a little bit. I don't know. Who knows? We could, like you said, would love to hear the end of that research that you will be doing.
I'd have a look, because maybe they probably have more skills. I mean, we would talk a lot more these days about mental health, and it's totally acceptable to have a coach and
accepting, right? You use the word acceptable. They're more accepting of change and things like that. Well, I think the past generations are definitely not. No, the baby boomers didn't. You didn't talk about any of this. Nothing. No ways. No ways. You're going to a shrink. You're crazy. Elizma, thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you. I cannot wait for your masterclass. If you haven't bought your ticket yet, you better go now, because tickets are running out fast. Digital Divas happening on the 23rd of August at Innovation City. It's a whole day full of knowledge, networking, and growth. See you there.